My parents expected me to wipe out their $200,000 debt just because I was their child. I almost laughed when they first brought it up. Surely they were joking. But the looks on their faces told me otherwise. "You're doing well now," my mom said, her tone deceptively sweet. "It's only fair that you help us after everything we've done for you." My dad nodded in agreement, arms crossed, like this was some kind of business deal I had no choice but to accept. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. They had called me home under the guise of a family discussion. But this wasn't a discussion. This was an ambush. Then my mom reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "Just sign these papers and we'll take care of the rest." I looked down at the documents in front of me. And that's when I realized they weren't just asking for help. They were demanding I sacrifice my future for their mistakes. I stared at the folder in front of me, my mind racing. What is this?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "Just some paperwork," my mom said casually, like she wasn't asking me to sign away my financial future. "It'll consolidate everything into one manageable loan under your name. You have a good job, steady income. It just makes sense." I blinked. "Wait, you want me to take out a loan? In my name? For you?" My dad sighed like I was being difficult. "It's just money, sweetheart," my mom said, trying to sound reassuring. "You'll pay it off in no time, and it's not like we're asking for a handout. We'll pay you back eventually." I almost laughed at that. Because here's the thing. My parents were terrible with money. Growing up, I watched them spend like there was no tomorrow. New cars, expensive vacations, designer clothes. If they wanted it, they bought it. Consequences be damned. I used to think my parents had it all figured out. As a kid, it felt like magic. We never had to worry about bills, our fridge was always full, and every Christmas my gifts were exactly what I asked for, no matter how expensive. But as I got older, I started noticing things. The hushed arguments behind closed doors, the unopened stacks of envelopes on the counter, the way my dad's face would darken whenever my mom came home with shopping bags. One night I overheard a conversation that stuck with me. "We can't afford this, Lisa," my dad had hissed at my mom. "You said the same thing last month," she shot back. "We'll figure it out." That was always their philosophy. We'll figure it out. But they never did. And now, they wanted me to be their way out. I exhaled sharply, trying to keep my voice steady. "How did this happen?" I asked. My mom rolled her eyes as if I was being unreasonable. "Things just got a little out of hand," she admitted. "You know how the economy is, and your dad and I, well, we didn't expect things to get this bad." "You didn't expect it?" I repeated, incredulous. "How do you not expect to rack up $200,000 in debt?" My dad scoffed. "You wouldn't understand. You've never had to support a family." I clenched my fists under the table. That was their excuse? That I wouldn't understand? Number, I understood perfectly. I understood that my parents had lived far beyond their means for years. I understood that they had ignored every opportunity to change their habits. And I understood that now, when the consequences had finally caught up with them, they expected me to clean up their mess. And the worst part? They didn't even feel guilty about it. "So, what do you say?" my mom prompted, smiling as if this was a done deal. I looked down at the papers again, the numbers blurring together. If I signed this, my financial freedom would be gone. My dreams of buying a home, gone. My plans to travel, to build my own life, gone. Everything I had worked for, sacrificed for, gone. And for what? To enable them to keep living the same reckless way they always had. I knew in that moment that I couldn't do it, but I also knew they weren't going to take no for an answer. No. The word came out firmer than I expected. The air in the room shifted. My mother's smile froze, her hands stiffening on the table. My father's jaw tightened, his arms crossed even tighter than before. "What do you mean, no?" my mom asked, her voice suddenly sharp. "I mean, I'm not doing this. I'm not paying your debt. I'm not signing anything. I'm not ruining my financial future for you." The tension thickened, suffocating. Then my dad let out a low, bitter chuckle, shaking his head like I was a naive child who just didn't get it. "Don't be ridiculous," he muttered. "You're our child. This is what family does." "Yeah, honey," my mom chimed in, her voice dripping with fake warmth. "We've always been there for you. We've sacrificed so much. And now, When we need just a little help, you're going to turn your back on us. I felt my stomach churn. A little help? I repeated, incredulous. 200,000 is not a little help. My dad waved a hand dismissively. You make good money, he said. This is nothing for you. You'll pay it off in no time. I felt my breath hitch. This wasn't just manipulation. This was an entitlement. I stared at them, searching for any sign of guilt, any flicker of remorse, anything that would tell me they understood how insane this was. But there was nothing. No regret. No shame. Just expectation. You wouldn't even be where you are without us, my mom snapped, her tone shifting into something colder. We fed you, clothed you, gave you everything, and now, when we need help, you're just going to abandon us. I could feel the blood rushing to my ears. You gave me everything, except financial responsibility, I shot back. You spent recklessly for years, and now you expect me to clean up your mess? My mom gasped like I had just slapped her. You ungrateful little... Enough. My voice cut through the air like a blade. I stood up so fast my chair screeched against the floor. I'm not doing this, I repeated, my voice like stone. I won't be manipulated into fixing mistakes I didn't make. My dad slammed his hand down on the table, making me flinch. You selfish brat, he bellowed. Do you even understand what we've sacrificed for you? How dare you talk to us like this? My mom clutched her chest like she was about to faint. If you don't help us, we'll lose everything, she whispered, her eyes welling up with fake tears. Our home, our car, we'll have nothing. And it'll be your fault. I let out a hollow laugh. My fault, I echoed. You spent money you didn't have, you ignored every warning sign, and now, when reality finally catches up, you expect me to take the fall? I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of clarity wash over me. No, I said, unwavering. You made these choices. You deal with the consequences. For the first time, something shifted in my parents' expressions. My mom's face twisted with anger, but there was something else there. Fear. Not fear of losing their home. Fear of losing control over me. You're really going to walk away from your own parents? My dad growled. No, I said, stepping back. You walked away from me the second you decided my future was less important than your past mistakes. I grabbed my coat, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from freedom. As I turned toward the door, my mother suddenly lunged forward, her fingers grasping at my wrist. Wait, she cried, desperation creeping into her voice for the first time. I froze for a moment. Please, she whispered. Just think about it. We're your family. I turned to look at her. Really look at her. The woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like I owed her for existing. The woman who had ignored every financial warning sign because she always thought someone else would clean up her mess. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no guilt. Just relief. I gently pried her fingers off my wrist. I have thought about it, I said softly. Then I pulled the door open and stepped outside. Behind me I could still hear my parents yelling, but for the first time in my life their words held no power over me. And that's when I realized they weren't just speechless, they were powerless. I expected silence, maybe a few weeks of cold shoulders and passive-aggressive messages. But my parents, they took things to a whole new level. The first few days after I walked out, my phone blew up with calls and texts. My mom sent long, guilt-ridden messages about how I'd abandoned them in their time of need. My dad, on the other hand, went for short, angry bursts, calling me selfish, heartless, ungrateful. I didn't respond. Then came the relatives. Some of my aunts and uncles started reaching out, most of them parroting the same lines. They're your parents. You owe them. After everything they've done for you, how can you be so cruel? It's just money. Family's more important. I could feel the weight of the manipulation pressing down on me, but this time, I didn't cave. I sent back the same response to every single person who tried to guilt-trip me. If you think it's just money, then why don't you pay their debt? Not a single one replied after that. The fallout begins. At first, my parents were convinced I would come crawling back. They thought I would feel guilty, that I would break down and give in like I always had. But I didn't. Weeks turned into months, and reality started to hit them. They could no longer ignore the notices piling up. The credit collectors weren't going away. The lifestyle they had clung to for so long was finally unraveling. They maxed out the last of their credit cards. They tried taking out new loans, but with their financial history, no bank was willing to help them. And then the real fallout began. They had to sell their luxury cars. The credit card companies froze their accounts. And when they could no longer keep up with their mortgage payments, they lost the house. It happened quietly. There was no big dramatic event, no final desperate plea for me to come save them. They packed up and moved into a small rental apartment, their credit destroyed, their status crumbling, and for the first time in their lives, they had no one left to bail them out. The shift in power. A few months later, my mother finally reached out again, but this time the message was different. I know you're still mad at us, but I just wanted to let you know that we're doing okay. I stared at the text for a long time before putting my phone down, because that's when I realized they survived. They didn't end up homeless. They didn't starve. They adapted because they had no other choice. I wondered how different things would have been if I had given in that day, if I had signed those papers, if I had let them trap me in their financial mess. They never would have changed. They would have kept spending recklessly, knowing that no matter what happened, I would be there to fix it. Walking away wasn't just the best decision for me. It was the best decision for them, too. A new beginning. As for me, at first there was guilt. Even though I knew I had done the right thing, years of conditioning don't just disappear overnight. But then something incredible happened. I felt free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying their burdens. I wasn't lying awake at night, worrying about how to fix their mistakes. I started focusing on my own future. I traveled. I saved more money. I started making plans for my own home, my own dreams, without fear that they would come in and take it all away. And for the first time in years, I felt in control of my life. Because saying no wasn't just about refusing to pay their debt. It was about breaking free. Saying no to family is never easy. It goes against everything we've been taught. Family comes first. You should always help your parents. You owe them for raising you. But at some point, you have to ask yourself, where does it end? If I had said yes that day, it wouldn't have stopped at $200,000. That loan would have been just the beginning. The moment I signed those papers, I would have become their personal safety net. Every time they made another reckless decision, they'd come running back, expecting me to fix it. And the worst part, they would have never changed. I used to think that helping someone meant saving them. That if I just gave a little more, sacrificed a little harder, they'd finally understand and start making better choices. But that's not how it works. Sometimes when people know there's always a way out, they never learn to stop digging. Walking away wasn't about punishing them. It wasn't about cutting them off or refusing to help. It was about setting boundaries, about refusing to let their mistakes dictate my future. It was about choosing me. And yeah, it wasn't easy. I won't pretend I didn't struggle with guilt, or that I didn't wonder if I was making a terrible mistake. But in the end, standing my ground was the best thing I could have done. Not just for myself, but for them too. Because here's the thing. They survived. They didn't end up homeless. They didn't starve. They had to adjust, had to change, had to finally take responsibility for their own lives. And for the first time, I could breathe. I could plan for my own future without fear of it being taken away. I could build a life that was truly mine, without the crushing weight of someone else's choices dragging me down. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where someone is asking you to sacrifice your well-being for their mistakes, take a step back and ask yourself, am I actually helping them? Or just making it easier for them to never change? Because sometimes the best way to help someone isn't to save them, it's to let them save themselves. What do you think? Have you ever had to make a tough decision like this? Let's talk in the comments.